Town planning is a topic that is elaborated in Vastu Shastra, which is an extensive subject that is part of Shilpa Shastra. Shilpa Shastra itself includes 10 Shastras, 32 Vidyas, and 64 Kalas. Vastu Shastra is an applied science based on geology, geography, astrology, astronomy, algebra, geometry, ergonomics, ecology, mechanical and civil engineering, and also psychology and theology. While the basic definition of Vastu is Vasanarham Sthanam Vastu, or dwelling sites, Mayamatam extends the term Vastu to all places where mortals and immortals dwell, classifying it under 4 divisions of earth, buildings, conveyances, and seats. Amartyas, Shaivamartyas, Yatra Yatra Vasantihi, Tad Vastviti, Tadnyehi, Tadbhedam Cha Vadamyaham, Bhumi Prasada Yanani, Shayanam Cha Chaturvidham, Bhureva Mukhya Vastusya, Tatra Jatani, Yanihi. It is clear from Vastu texts that they have elaborated more on the construction of villages or Grama Nirmana than town planning, Nagara Nirmana, and every variety of Pura or city has a prototype in a corresponding Grama that is explained in detail. Again, this was probably because villages were not totally agrarian. They were composite miniature towns. The Arthashastra rightly amalgamates villages and towns by suggesting that a Sthaniya town located at the center of 800 villages can serve as a capital, the Karvata town can serve as an administrative capital, and the Dronamukha town can adopt 400 villages under its purview. The cohesive arrangement has a parallel in the coordination between villages and district headquarters that we see today. While on the topic of town planning in ancient India, it is important to appreciate the masterminds who actually created the towns, the Sthapatis, who deftly practiced Vastu Shastra as an applied science. The basic 4 qualifications specified for a Sthapati are that he should be an adept in Shastras, should have the capacity to execute the project karma. He should have prajna, wisdom to make right decisions, creative genius and spark of intelligence, and finally, but most importantly, Sheelam, a strict code of ethics. The Samarangana Sutradhara says, Shastram karma tatha prajna Sheelam cha kriyanvitam lakshya lakshana yuktartha shastrashto naro bhavet. The best Sthapatis were adept in 8 branches of Sthapatya that included designing the layout of the town according to Vastupada Vinyasa, construction of fortification and gates at the entrance, erection of walls, roads, drainage system, water sources, construction of civic amenities, public buildings, palaces and temples, erection of flagposts, the Vedic altar, camps and forts. I am not reading it out for want of time. I think there is one more person who is going to present a paper. So I've just I'm giving the meaning in English so that you can read it from the PowerPoint. So an expert town planner's field of study was indeed extensive. Very similar to the architectural team of today, the architect did not work alone. He was ably assisted by his team consisting of Sutragrahin, the supervisor, Takshaka, who was skilled in cutting stone, wood and brick to measurements, and Vardhaki, mason, who assembled everything. So the first task of the Sthapati was to select the type of town from the many categories described in the text based on the size of the town, size of population and location. Once the type of town and the corresponding size was determined by the Sthapati, the Vastupada Vinyasa that gave a basic layout, the basic drawing was drawn and elaborate Vastu Pujas carried out. The entire layout of the town was planned before planning individual houses. Nagaram vinyased adau paschat gehani vinyased anyatha yadi kuryat tattada na shubham adishet. So the outer wall was first demarcated and moats dug beyond that. 3 moats were generally dug. The soil dug out was wisely used to later build the lower part of the city walls. The outer city wall was built with provisions for Gopura, the main Dwara, fortifications at the entrance with turrets, watchtowers, armory for storing arsenal and a temple. The internal layout was then drawn with layout of roads conforming to folk planning. While planning roads, provision was made for draining the water used in the city to the moat built outside the city. The Sangamira epic, Manimekalai, vividly describes the entrance into the city, indicating that this specification of the text was in practice during that period. The temple, royal palace, and public buildings like court, assembly halls, and so on were also planned, and inner roads were wider than the roads of the periphery. The Shukra Niti Sara recommends a study of the whole ecosystem where biodiversity, green cover, adequate fodder and fuel, navigable waterways are included as a prerequisite to the selection of the site for a capital city. Nana vriksha lata kirne cha pushpa pakshi ganavrite subrihad udak dhanye trinakashta sukhe tatha आ सिंधु नौ गमाकूले नातिदूर महीधरे सुरम्य समभूत देशे राजधानीं प्रकल्पयेत्. All the Vastu texts converge on standard parameters for Bhupariksha or soil testing. This involves analysis of contour, color, order, feature, sound, taste, and touch respectively. Only this test will lead them to the next step, namely measurement and demarcation of site. And the text on Vastuvidya also specifies similar characteristics on land unfit for construction. To quote Manasara, it's in the 4th chapter, 21 to 39, again, the soil should not be covered with ashes, charcoal, skulls, bones, husks, pointed objects, gravel and limestone and cavities. It should not have thorny trees. Bitter and salty soil should be avoided. In terms of sound, land that has the sound of jackal, camel, dog or donkey or torrent should be rejected. So, the first physical examination helped to determine if the site was impure, barren, hollow, infertile or contained minerals that may affect the stability of the ground. The presence of ashes, husks and bones were pointers to a past disaster through fire, flood and land prone to such disasters were carefully avoided. Vastu texts recommend a few tests to check solidity, and we will see one test as in Mayamatam. A pit 1 cubit size should be dug and it should be filled again with the same soil. During refill, if the soil is not enough, it is unfit. If it is just sufficient to fill it to the brim, it is acceptable. If there is excess soil after filling the pit, the site is idle for construction. Soil quality was thus one of the determinants for selecting the location of the town. Broadly speaking, ancient towns may be divided under 2 heads: politico-administrative towns and commercial towns. The concept of metro capitals and district headquarters was also prevalent, as I indicated before. And the Amarakosha gives a definition. It says there is a division into Nagara and Mula Nagara and Mukhya Nagara. Anyattu en Mula Nagarat Puram. And the commentary's explanation is Shakheva Nagaram. The Nagara is defined as a heavily populated, well-developed town with temples, artisans, skilled workers and traders. Janaihi parivritam kraya vikrayadibihi anekajati samyuktam karmakaraihi samanvitam sarva daivata samyuktam nagaram chabhidiyate. Towns situated on the seashore or river banks became commercial capitals called Pattanam. And more specifically, Kamikagama defines a Pattanam as a town inhabited by all professionals with influx of visitors from other countries. Kraya Vikraya Samyuktam Abdi Tira Samashrutam Deshantarehi Gataihi Janaihi Nana Jati Bhiranvitam Pattanam Tat Samakhyatam Vaishyer Adhyushitam. A striking example of a Pattanam situated at the point where River Kaveri meets the sea is Kaveri Pumpattinam in Tamil Nadu. Another example of a trading port situated along the seaside or on the bank of a river is the Karmuka Nagara. The city shaped like a Karmuka or bow is said to bring prosperity to the king. If the town had a strategic positioning, then a fortified city was built. An example of this is the Prastara Nagara. Built along the lines of a Prastara Grama or village, this is a well-protected fortified city with multi-level entry gates within the city. Even Pataliputra had multi-level gates within the city. There were cities that were built to settle and promote native industries. The Chaturmukha town was exclusively built for the people with no palace or fort, where trading was an important means of livelihood. There was a clear plan on the layout for shops. The east for shops dealing in grains or what we should now call groceries, gold and silver in the south, clothing in the west, and clothing and perfumery in the north. They were education-centric cities built by the king or wealthy person and dedicated to the people, dedicated to the public, called as Manusha Nagara, Yajna Nagara, and Yajna Nagara with mathas and free chowtries, Yajnashalas and Patashalas. That is the range. I am mentioning only a few of the types of towns for want of time. Just to introduce you to this idea. Varanasi and Srirangam are examples of towns that evolved around the temples. And Devanagarams or ancient towns are also mentioned in the text as places where a Swayambhulinga or remnants of an ancient temple was discovered. The commentator to the text mentions that a town may have other old relics or palaces, lakes or mantapas, but the specific date of its establishment may not be known. If a temple is discovered, then that temple should be restored. So we know that Vastu texts are ancient. Such ancient literatures mention the existence of traces of civilization of their predecessors. And from this we may infer that a well-developed society existed over many centuries in our country. So these are the small aspects that I want to highlight in the limited time that has been given to me. A unique feature of ancient town planning was that it fostered the development of diverse styles of architecture like Nagara, Vesara, Dravida, Panchala, Gandhara, Chola, Pandya, Hoysala, Buddhist, Lata, Varata. A few. Aesthetic sense reigned supreme as within the city. Only one uniform style was recommended. Can we say this of any modern city in India? That is, maybe Chandigarh is a well-developed city, but we don't have a uniform style in most cities. So here they insisted on a uniform style. For instance, in the matter of building a school, Vishwakarma Vastu Shastra states, Vidya Shalam Eka Shailim Eka Sutra Pramanakam. Let one style be followed and the same proportions maintained with regard to ornamentations. Wise choices were made factoring regional climatic requirements. So, the design of roof, windows and other aspects of construction were adapted to the weather conditions in each district or region. The houses in Rajasthan were protected from the harsh weather with thick walls and small windows. Those in Kerala were raised above the ground, had sloping roofs, a veranda around to protect against heavy rainfall. The general rule was if a particular style was already prevalent in the city, new constructions should follow that style to maintain aesthetic uniformity. This was the case with measurements also. The standard measurements were fairly similar, but there were slight regional variations, as seen in the Chidambara Moram and Tanjavur Moram within the same Chola country. Even in the matter of planting trees, the texts recommend that trees should be planted well before the development of plots and buildings. Ado vrikshani vinyasya paschat grihani vinyase anyata yadi kuryatu tat grihan naiva shobhanam. The trees recommended were Ashwatha, Banyan, Udumbra, Plaksha for parks and broader streets, so that huge trees could provide shade to the tired wayfarer. Smaller trees like banana, neem, bale and flowering plants were recommended for planting within houses and upavanas or parks. The texts warn that arbitrary planting of trees will be detrimental to the foundation of buildings and will interfere with lighting and ventilation in the neighborhood. The Vastu texts ensure coordination between individual buildings through bylaws so that the whole town emerged as an organic entity maintaining harmony and cohesion. It is obvious from the text that a definite relationship between the width of the street and the height of dwellings in individual streets was maintained. The temple and king's palace were in the heart of the city, and the broader streets were around them, and the recommended height was greater than that provided to other ranks like army commander and ministers. The buildings in every street thus had the same number of stories depending on their rank in the government machinery, and the walls were also of the same height. This ensured a good ventilation and light for all residents of the street. Shaladibir na kartavyam na kuryat tunga nimnakam samam shalam tatak kuryat samam prakaram. The Narada Samhita also gives a similar idea. The text carefully avoided unregulated ad hoc constructions that may appear asymmetrical and disproportionate. Outside the houses, wide footpaths or vitika had to be erected, the width being 1/3 of the width of the house, or on either sides of the thoroughfares, very similar to the pavements or sidewalks that we have today. There were provisions for construction of new houses also. But new houses, see, they've gone into minute details of planning. New houses should not encroach on another space. The intervening space between two houses or between two extended portions shall be 3 or 4 feet according to the Arthashastra. Owners had the freedom to construct their house in the manner they liked, but it should not cause inconvenience to others. Again, doors and windows of houses on opposite sides of a road should not face one another. This was probably adopted to ensure privacy. From each house, a water course of 3 padas had to be constructed with sufficient slope so that the water shall flow in a continuous stream into the drain, and Arthashastra imposes a fine for violation of this rule. Water sources were distributed throughout the town, and it ranged from wells, step wells, baths, fountains, tanks, dams and reservoirs. The area around the dam had parks, bowers, ornamented arches to enhance the beauty, as we see in Adalaj and Amer even today. The Kallanai Dam, built by Karigala Cholan 1800 years ago, spanning Kaveri River, functional to this day, is an engineering marvel worthy of mention. It was built to check flooding and to divert water to other areas of irrigation. Aware of the difficulty in building masonry in the shifting riverbed, a strong, broad base was laid by throwing in unhewn stones, which were further layered with smaller stones before constructing the masonry, conforming to the method suggested in Vastu's texts for building walls near a moat, and reminding one of the similarity to the Setu bridge constructed over the sea in coastal Rameshwaram. I have briefly touched upon only some aspects of town planning in ancient India. As you would have noticed, the text gave a holistic structured plan for the town layout. The landscaping was given due importance. Public spaces were visually appealing with beautiful ornamentations. The cohesive, comprehensive literature of Shilpa and Vastu texts and the literary evidences provided by Vedas, Itihasas, Puranas, Agamas, Niti Shastras and the descriptive passages in Kavyas point towards the existence of well-planned cities. We have very few archaeological evidences today, and until new scientific methods are developed to unearth archaeological remains, literary evidences do have their value for establishing the existence of ancient cities in India. I once again thank KSRI for giving me an opportunity to share some thoughts on town planning.